a former Navy SEAL and Trump administration staffer who resigned after racist, sexist, homophobic remarks that he had made on the radio were exposed, has now been hired by a pro-Trump group. A pro-Trump group whose leaders Trump had dinner with just last week. Think about that. Think about that when I play you what this man said. Carl Higbie is joining America First policies despite comments and N-word filled social media posts reported by our KFile. Listen for yourself.
I just don't like Muslim people. And people always rip me a new one for that. They're like, Carl, you're racist. You're sexist. You're fat. I'm like, Jesus Christ. I just don't like Muslim people because their ideology sucks. It's her and her husband with the 5 kids and the mother or the grandmother of the kids. And they don't have jobs. They're there all the time. I bet you can guess what color they are. You are breaking the morals, the moral fiber of our country. You know, I don't like gay people. I just don't.
That was just a snippet. Out front now, the former senior communications advisor for the Trump campaign, Jason Miller, and CNN commentator Bakari Sellers. Thanks to both. So, Jason, let me start with you. Once those comments were discovered, the KFile putting those out there, those are things he'd said in the past on the radio, Higbie was forced to resign from his job in the Trump administration. Is it acceptable for this pro-Trump group to turn around and hire him?
Well, Aaron, I got to call balls and strikes here and say that I'm both disturbed and very concerned that someone who said these comments, these hateful type comments, was then hired by the C4. And I think that if I'm a donor to the C4, I'm probably pretty ticked off that someone like this was hired. And I'll tell you, especially because this is not how the president talks. This is not how anyone near the president talks. And this is exactly the story that the left wants to go and paint of the president and his supporters. So when they go and hire someone like this, then obviously we're having segments like this talking about it. And in the spirit of calling balls and strikes, though, I don't think this type of language is appropriate anywhere across the board. And that's why I'm also very concerned when I see certain Democrats continuing to embrace the radical, hateful teachings of Louis Farrakhan, whether it be Danny Davis or we see Keith Ellison, the vice chair of the DNC, continuing to meet with him and have associations with him. If I can stand up and say that the C4 shouldn't have hired someone like this, then I hope that Bakari and other Democratic friends of mine can stand up and say we should have an absolute rejection of people like Farrakhan and these hateful words.
All right, so Bakari, before I go to you, let me give you a chance, though, to finish your point, Jason. You've come out and you've said this is not acceptable. Why? And the president doesn't talk this way. Does he need to do something about it? I mean, the people who run this group he was with for dinner last week, he knows them. He's friendly with them. He had dinner with them last week, right? Should he say something? He can stop this. Does he need to?
Well, I think that obviously the attention that's being brought on this now, I have to imagine that something happens pretty swiftly here. I'm not in the business of telling them exactly what the president should go and do, but I can't imagine that he finds this in any way acceptable. And quite frankly, he's probably pretty ticked off that someone went and did this.
Bakari?
Well, we have to look at this from a 50,000-foot view. I mean, the fact is this is the same White House that had someone like Steve Bannon in it, who not only praised Mussolini recently, but went out last week and said, if they want to call you racist, let them call you racist. The fact is, Carl Higbie, he's a racist, he's a homophobe, he's a xenophobe, he's a bigot. And for many of us, we're not surprised that he was attracted to the words and the actions of Donald Trump. But this brings on a lot larger conversation that we're now having that we probably otherwise wouldn't have, because the 45th president of the United States has brought these tensions on, these racial tensions on with steroids. And Jason's correct. And I'm very proud to call Jason my friend tonight because he's rejecting this. And, you know, I can sit here and say that Louis Farrakhan is an anti-Semite as well. And his words and his language do not belong in the public discourse. That's an easy call for me to make. However, what I also will say is that Louis Farrakhan is not in the mainstream of Democratic thought. Donald Trump is Republican thought. And Donald Trump allows these racist ideologies to breathe. Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, Carl Higbie, there's a direct line, there's a direct correlation. Carl Higbie just says the word nigger very casually, so he needs to go first.
Jason, what do you say?
Well, I'd say that what we need to do is, I think on both sides, whether it's on the right or the left, we should have a complete rejection of people who are trying to bring this into the discourse. And whether it's Carl Higbie saying this or, respectfully, Bakari, I would say that Farrakhan, yes, is very much outside the mainstream. But that's what's so troubling is you have folks like the vice chair of the DNC who are continuing to embrace him. You have people like Danny Davis who, when asked about Farrakhan, just talked about, what do you say, we can talk about the Jewish question later. I mean, that's pretty problematic stuff. And I think that when you have leaders who, I think you would agree, Ellison and Davis
Jason,
are very much in the mainstream, we should be telling them they can't be embracing folks like Farrakhan.
Look, Jason, I think you guys both have a point, but Bakari does have a crucial point, right? The guy that you're talking about, part of this, is the leader of the Republican Party and the leader of the free world. He is the president of the United States of America. This guy was working for him.
Well, and that, Aaron, that's exactly my point, is that he was fired from the administration.
Is that the word you'd use? Because we're very careful. Just to be clear, he technically resigned, and he didn't do so until the KFile at CNN exposed all those things he'd said in the radio.
Well, I mean, he left. And it probably should have been a bit more forceful than that. But this is not the type of behavior, attitudes that the president's going to allow to happen. Again, people around the president do not talk, do not act like this, and he shouldn't be a part of the organization.
Bakari, final word since Jason had the first.
No, I mean, I agree with Jason somewhat, but I still think that we have to combat this, and we have to combat the systemic and systematic racism we see in this country, with direct force. The fact remains, Carl Higbie is a racist. He was working very close to the President of the United States. Steve Bannon is a racist, xenophobic bigot who was senior advisor to the President of the United States. We can talk about everything on the periphery, but we have to deal with what is in the core of this country. The President of the United States has a problem with race, and we need to have that conversation.